Hey, this is Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today is going to be another one on our green XJ project here. In this video we're going to be working on the stiffening of our unibody in the preparation for our custom long arm suspension. We're also going to go over how we're going to design and build our rocker protection here, because we are going to stiffen up the unibody, and then from there we're going to come out and part of the stiffening up of this unibody is also going to be building this rocker arm protection in. First, let's talk about the stiffening of the unibody and why we're doing that. Of course, the Cherokees are a unibody design, meaning they don't have a separate frame to body. So what will happen is as these Jeeps get taken off-road and you get a lot of articulation and a lot of twisting in the body, there's a chance that you could actually tweak that body. The other thing you'll hear is that you'll hear a lot of snaps and pops and ugly stuff as you're off-roading, and that's actually the sheet metal flexing as you're off-roading. So a lot of people will go in and will stiffen up the body for good reason. And we are going to do the same thing. However, we're going to be doing it a little bit different. A lot of times what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to focus on, of course, the area between the front and rear axles, but you're going to want to focus between where the weight is. And at the front, that's going to be coming up through the coil spring, of course, so stiffening from the coil spring back all the way back to the rear axle. And even if you wanted to go back to the very rear of the Jeep, you know, that's what a lot of time people are doing. Now for us, when we're building these Cherokees, we're typically not just stiffening up where this unibody frame is. We're typically building other things into it, you know, like our sliders here and cages and other stuff. So all of that adds into that structural rigidity of the unibody, so we typically don't have to go up all the way into the front and things like that. And that's what you're going to see in this build. We're actually going to be building our stiffeners from this point here, which is just behind the lower control arms, back to basically the mount for the rear leaf spring suspension. And then, you know, for us, when we build our sliders in here, we're actually going to be tying those sliders into the rear, the front mount for the rear suspension, so that way we further stiffen it. So basically we're going to create a really strong center section, and we'll still have 2 feet here that are hanging off, but with the additional plans for this Jeep in the future, that should never be an issue. You know, we did the same thing with a lot of our Cherokees, including the Cherokee that we competed in for a long time, and we've never really had an issue with that area. However, if you're not building sliders, if you're not building a cage, if you're not building other things into your Cherokee, you're probably going to want to go ahead and go all the way to, you know, that at least that front coil spring, and then go back to, at minimum, I'd say, the front mount for the rear leaf springs. Now for us, like I said, we'll start here, work back. Our center section piece here, now typically these stiffeners will be either 10 gauge or 3/16. For us, we're going to use a combination. There's a reason for that, is that the center section here we're actually going to be using to be our main mount for our cross member for our transfer case, as well as our front suspension. And then after that, we're actually going to use a 10 gauge piece at the rear to just add some additional stiffness. So the next step is we need to go and we need to cut those pieces for this vehicle. So we've got our stiffeners made. Like I said, I'm using a 7 gauge one for this front area here, because we're actually going to be mounting our cross member for the long arm suspension to that. So we're going a little bit heavier here. And we've made these in 2 pieces. We've got a front section, and then we've got a back section that's actually made out of 10 gauge. And that back section basically will just go against the rear spring hanger for the leaf springs, and then it actually goes underneath that all the way to the back of the that hanger back there. And then whenever we actually do our sliders, we actually tie into that box that is around the leaf spring hanger there. For the front one, of course, you know, we've got our mounting. So for us, we're having to use the transfer case to help get this located. The biggest pain in the butt about this whole operation pretty much is going to be drilling these holes underneath if you're going in and doing something like this. But most people that are, you know, keeping their stock cross members, you know, you won't have to worry about that because you'll have holes in there already. Speaking of that, you know, we don't have these stiffeners available for sale at the time this video is created. However, we are working on a kit. We just haven't been able to get enough Cherokees in and do enough of them to feel confident that we can, meet the needs every time we ship them out. But in the future, or if you're watching this video and you're interested in the set, get a hold of us. We will make prototype sets, but as I said, we're kind of still working out a little bit of the kinks. So what we need to do now is we've got to put our stiffeners up there, and we got to mark out the perimeter, and we'll need to mark out each one of these X's in here. And now the Cherokees, unfortunately, were the vehicles that when they started making these, they started using a lot of adhesives and a lot of sprayed in seam sealer. So with these Cherokees specifically, there's a lot of seam sealer and stuff that you're going to get into, undercoating on this entire body. So now that we've got it marked out, we're going to end up spending quite a bit of time with a wire wheel and a grinder and a DA and everything, and taking off all this undercoat and getting it down to bare metal. And basically my goal is going to be to weld these vertical parts solid and do one every 4 inches along this top, and then weld each one of these crosses except for this one because we put one where the hole goes. And then on the inside here we will do the same thing. We'll weld 1 inch every 4 inches along the inside. Okay, so we've got the unibody frame here cleaned up, ready for our stiffeners, and we're going to get ready to start putting those on. Like we said, we've got 2 pieces, the front and rear. We're going to start with the front piece, and ours is going to be a little bit different than probably a stock Cherokee, in that being that we're doing that cross member in there. We're going to have to make sure that we use that cross member to line up the front piece so that we get it in the correct place. Most Jeeps, you're just going to want to make sure you line up the 2 holes for the stock cross member. Now there's a couple ways you can install these, or a couple starting points to install them. You're hoping that the stiffeners are bent at a 90, but there's always some tolerance in there, so plus or minus a couple of degrees. You're going to have the option either to push it flat against the bottom and then try to clamp around it to pull the side in if you have to, or you can try clamping it to the side and then if you need to push the bottom up. Now normally for us, what we would do if this was if we weren't building our own transfer case cross member into there, we would actually clamp it from the side first, get the side flush against the Cherokee, and then use a jack to actually push up the bottom because then we can use the weight of the Jeep itself to kind of help push that up, especially with these unibodies here because they are so thin. Now once we get those in place, we'll start to weld them. Now the real area that you have to watch in welding is going to be the center section here. These areas up here at the front and at the rear are actually double thickness, so they are a lot thicker than the center section. The center section is really only about 14 gauge thick, so it's pretty thin. So when you go to weld these, you're going to want to be careful with your settings and that you don't blow through. So just go slow. Make sure you don't get any big holes, because having to fix these in these bodies can be a pain because you start getting into the areas where you didn't get any of the undercoat taken off, and it'll be kind of difficult. And that's the other thing with this is that we cleaned it up as good as we could, but we're going to end up running some spots where our weld's probably going to go to crap, and that's because there's something on here that we didn't get off. So kind of be prepared for that. adjust your welding as you need. You know, if we're unable to put a weld here, well, we'll put a couple of welds a lot closer to it so that we can kind of get our spacing there. And you know, just, you know, you can overkill it is better than underkilling as far as the welding goes. So without further ado, we'll get started putting our front pieces on. Welding on our stiffeners here in the section, so you can see we pretty much welded this whole area here solid. Now this piece here, we're gonna, whenever we put a tube in here, we're actually gonna tie this box to that tube, and then we welded pretty much in between each one of our crosses up top, and then we welded all of our crosses closed all the way to the front. We welded the front solid, then we basically slit this and hammered it in so that we could weld it across the bottom, since this is square and the frame actually has a chamfer to it. So we'll get underneath now. We'll take a look at what we did there. To the outside, we pretty much welded about every 4 inches, at least an inch in some cases, especially up in here where the cross member is going to mount. We welded a little bit more. As you get back here, I mean, the frame is actually wider at the front and then it narrows up, so as you get back here you can see there's you kind of got to get down in there to put a weld. Basically put our welds across there, and we welded it solid across the back and then a few inches down. I mean, the main thing is you definitely always want to weld your corners solid, because if you ever get a crack or something that's going to start, it's typically going to start at a corner or a you know, like where a T would come together. So now let's take a look at what our next step is going to be. Alright, so now that we've got our unibody frame stiffened up, we've got a good mounting point for our sliders, the next step is to kind of figure out what direction we want to go with our slider design. Now, if you've got a few different options. One of the options really hinges on whether you're going to run doors or not. If you're not going to run doors, and like in the case of our yellow Cherokee, where we don't have normal doors, we've got tube doors on here that we use all the time. We actually went all the way up to this upper door sill here and cut there and came out with our tube from there. So you can use a 2x2 tube or 2x4 tube and then build over to the unibody. Now, if you do that, you're going to end up, especially if you run those tubes straight over the unibody at an angle, you're going to end up also going through part of the floor. So what we did, we notched out the floor and we put some panels around it and welded it all solid, so it closed everything back up. Now, the other option, if you are going to run your doors, you can come up and you can cut here and, you know, attach a tube there, 2x2 or 2x4 tube, and then do the same thing. And you'll have some of the same issue, but you won't necessarily get in the floor as much. It'll be a little bit less. Now for us though, being that our main business is manufacturing and my strength is really design, you know, we've decided to take a little bit different look at it on this Jeep. So we've came up with a design that we hope that in the future we'll be able to manufacture and sell, so that people can, you know, do sliders on their Cherokees, but not necessarily have to cut into the door sill or any of the body. So it'll work out for a lot more people and actually be just as strong, if not stronger. Now, one thing that we looked at was, you know, we want to make sure that we do have a little bit of spacing out from the body, because the main goal of these sliders is going to be keeping trees off the side, especially if you're running doors. Because these doors kind of bow out, we really need to come out a little ways from the body, so we're going to be about 3 inches out by the time we're done with our sliders. So what we've done is we've already gone in, we've already made our slider tube, and we've kind of mocked up kind of got our jack stands here to show roughly about where the slider tube is going to go. Now with our design, like I said, we're not going to cut into the body. We're going to have some brackets that come down. We're going to have another bracket on the pinch seam that we're tying all those into, and then we're going to run tubes straight over from that pinch seam bracket to the unibody frame. So right now what we'll do is we can start taking a look at how that's going to go together. Alright, we're ready to assemble our passenger side slider. We've already assembled our driver's side slider here. As you can see, we did that because this is a new design and we wanted to test and make sure that we were happy with the design before we did any kind of video on it. And with this design, this isn't a design that we have released at this time. And right now it's the end of December 2020, thank God. And if you're watching this in the future, you can check our website if you're interested in sliders like these, and we should have a kit out there after a while. We want to do a few sets, probably at least one more set before we release it, just to make sure that we've got everything squared away for you. Now if you are really interested in a set of these, and we don't have them on our website yet, taboocustoms.com, then you can get a hold of us there at the website, or get us on our Facebook page, or even comment on this video, and we can get a hold of you. We can work out a prototype set for you. Now with this set, whenever we do create the kit, we're basically going to be supplying the sheet parts. We're going to supply all these parts. We're going to leave this tube here because the tube is easy to get pretty much anywhere, and to ship a 64-inch long piece of tube is going to be really costly. It'd be a lot cheaper for both of us if you just source this tube locally. It's easily cut, and really there's not much to it. These pieces are the ones that really would take a while to make if you didn't have the capability to make them. So what we're going to do for the rest of this video is we'll basically assemble these sliders. We'll put them on. We're not going to cover it in real detail because in the future when we do release these, we will do a very detailed video on that. So what we're going to do is we've actually already gone and made our pinch seam plate, because this is going to mount to the pinch seam. So we'll go to the Jeep, we'll match drill these holes in the pinch seam once we clamp it up there, and then we'll take that off and we can come back and start to build this assembly. Then we'll go back to the Jeep, we'll put this sheet assembly on the Jeep, we'll be able to locate our tube in the correct position and then start locating each of these tubes. So we'll basically kind of fast forward through all this. Like I said, catch the video in the future if you want to see details on how this is actually put together. Alright, so unfortunately I think our battery died halfway through welding up our sliders here, so you might not have caught the end of that. What we've done is we've welded them up pretty well solid and went ahead and painted them. Now we're getting ready to install them. So basically we go in here, we'll bolt these to the pinch seam, and then we'll make sure it's level and then weld them into the unibody. Alright, sliders are now installed. They're ready to go bounce off some rocks and some trees. And thank you for watching the video. As we mentioned earlier, if you're interested in a set of these sliders, building a set for yourself, you can contact us on our Facebook page or at taboocustoms.com and get a hold of us, and we should eventually here have a kit available for these sliders. So anyway, thanks for watching.